these four areas increase generally the cost of housing in unincorporated DuPage County, or in the county in general. And these areas are the availability of land and land cost, zoning and platting entitlements, the regulatory environment in DuPage County, and also the fees associated with the regulatory environment and the entitlements. You can go to the next slide. Relative to the first challenge, dealing with the availability of land and land cost, the county has been very successful, and that's why we are essentially built out in this county. Most of our land that is available is not a greenfield site. It's not vacant. It has existing development on it. And because of that, for developers, in order to redevelop that land, there's costs associated with that. They have to rehabilitate the land. In addition, the land is simply not available as vacant land, so the costs are very high. In unincorporated area, the land that arguably would be available is land that is somewhat distressed. It is land that has lack of infrastructure, public infrastructure to it. There's no sewer and water available to those properties. The road system, those properties, while there are roads there, the road system is not consistent with municipal road systems. They're smaller roads. There is not a lot of pedestrian and sidewalk access to these areas. They're developed on what's called a ditch and swale type of development, as opposed to curb and gutter. So the storm sewer systems in those areas are diminished a bit. In addition, the unincorporated land is also inundated with special management areas, floodplain, wetland, depressed areas, bad soils. So these factors often, and along with the cost of these properties, these factors also tend to lead developers to bypass these properties, because the cost of acquiring this land and the lack of infrastructure in this area, and the cost to bring that infrastructure in, is almost cost prohibitive. In talking to the developers, they estimate that anywhere between 20 and 30% of the cost of doing any development is in the cost of the land. There are some solutions that the county can take because of some of our programs that we have to sort of mitigate the challenges to the availability of land and land cost. And the county is in the process of identifying areas of the county that are underserved and underinvested in because of some of these issues that we talked about. We have been able to do this through our code enforcement program and also our neighborhood revitalization program, our clean and lean program. We've identified areas in the county that, as I said, are underserved, lack public infrastructure. And because of that, they are depressed, they're blighted, they're distressed. And a lot of times we are using code enforcement to try and get these properties cleaned up. In addition, we've used our clean and lean program funding to, in some instances, go in and clean the properties up ourselves, demo the properties, lien the properties, and eventually foreclose on the lien and take the properties. In those instances where we've done that, we have in the past auctioned those properties off to recoup our cost. One of the things that we could do with this land that we acquire is hold on to the land and not auction it off, and potentially use that land along with other land that the county owns through either stormwater projects or transportation projects or public works projects that we've acquired, and maybe combine some of that land with some of the land that we've gained through our clean and lean program, and start to put that land in what are called land banks or land trust, and inventory that land and hold on to it and make that land available for developers. And by doing that, developers who would be developing affordable housing, either in whole or in part, on these pieces of properties. And by doing that, we could dramatically reduce the cost of one of the challenges developers have, and that is affordable land in the county. If you go to the next set of slides, we've got 4 or 5 slides here that deal with how governments are able to bank land and hold it for future development purposes. I'm not going to go into all of these slides, but they're available for you to read. They talk about what land banks are and what housing land trusts are. We also have some videos on the Cook County Land Bank and also some land trust, and you can go through those and see how land banks are created and how land trusts are created. One of the things that the county could certainly do is create their own land banks and create their own housing trust, or potentially partner with other organizations who have the statutory authority to engage in land banks and housing trust. But like I say, we won't go into those right now, but that is a method by which governments can acquire property, hold property, and eventually use that property to offset some of the cost that developers find in terms of having available land and high cost land. We could, like I say, we could give land to development for affordable housing. We could hold the land and lease the property for people to build on top of. But these are some of the tools that could be used in order to inventory that land. The best examples that we've been able to find throughout the area and the country is the Cook County Land Bank. There's about 120 land banks in the country. Cook County is probably one of the largest ones in the county or in the country. Also out in King County in Seattle, Washington, they have a program that has been in place for about 20 years now, and it's run very well. And they've got many properties in their land bank. And we've got some case studies that you can look at and see how those land banks and land trusts work. The second thing that we have gleaned from developers, both market rate developers and also developers who are building affordable housing, that creates cost to building affordable housing is the entitlement process. Entitlement meaning the way that you get a development in place in order to build on it. And it's typically done through public hearings at the Zoning Board of Appeals level for the county. In most municipalities, it's the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Plan Commission, and then going through the entire process. Zoning Board of Appeals, public hearing, in our case, Development Committee, and then ultimately final disposition before the full county board. In talking to developers, they estimate that entitlement process increases the cost of development anywhere between 20 and 25% across the board. So the entitlement process, coupled with the land costs in this county, you can see adds almost 50% of cost to the underlying development of a project, whether it be market rate or affordable housing. One of the things that we have found over the past 10 to 15 years throughout the entire county is most of the larger development in the county, whether it's unincorporated or incorporated, is accomplished by entitlement. Most development is not done by right anymore. By right meaning that you have the right to build, you go in and get a building permit, and you start building. Most development, because our county is so built out, is done through the entitlement process. Zoning boards of appeals, public hearings, plan commissions, and development committee and county board in our case. Not only does that add cost to the developer because they have to hire lawyers, planners, architects, engineers to come in and sort of prove up their case in order to get to the point where they can actually start building, but also the time associated with that. It's estimated anywhere between 3 and 15 months to go through the entitlement process. And when you factor in, for instance, the land use challenges that we talked about and the entitlement challenges, we oftentimes have developers just bypassing properties because it's just not cost effective when they develop their performers and whether or not they're going to be able to develop a property and make some money from it. They just bypass some of these properties because it's just not worth their time, because they're just not going to make any money from it. And they may not even get the entitlement after all of the public hearing process. The other thing that's important to note for counties, and we've seen it here in DuPage County, is that not only do you have to go through a land use entitlement of the county, but because municipalities have some statutory allowances to weigh in on county projects, either through the zoning process or the subdivision process, the developer has to go through a dual entitlement process, both with the county and also with the municipality. By law, municipalities have the right to sign off on any subdivision plat where the plat's within 1.5 miles of their community. In most instances, municipalities require the developer to go through their entitlement process as well as the county's entitlement process. As it relates to the zoning processes, we've seen at this board before where a zoning board of appeals or development committee might be in favor of a particular type of development, but if a municipality within 1.5 miles has an objection to that, it requires an extraordinary vote for the county to approve a particular type of a development. That takes time, and in some instances, even if the county approves that development, a municipality can push the vote to a supermajority where it doesn't pass and the entitlement fails. That costs time and money, and that adds to the entire development process. Now, one of the ways that we can mitigate that is that we can create overlay districts on some of these distressed areas that I talked about, wherein an overlay district, a planning process could be put in place that's approved by the county board that recognizes that we have some properties in the county that are distressed, that are in need of reinvestment, and that providing for an as-of-right development for housing developments that have in whole or in part workforce or affordable housing components to them, the county could create these overlay districts so that the developers could come in as of right and not have to go through the entitlement process in the county. That would save time and that would save money. In addition, and I'm oversimplifying it because there'd be a lot of work that would have to go into all of that, not only work here at the county level, but work with our municipal partners in identifying the properties that are distressed that might be available for overlay districts, and to work with our municipal partners and our township partners to have them realize that redevelopment and investment in these properties would not only be good for the underlying property, but would be good for the surrounding area that may include municipal properties as well. One of the things that we could do as part of these overlay districts as well is to include density bonuses, the ability to have more density in a property if a developer was willing to include affordable housing as part of their development. So there's a number of things that we could do to make the development process a little less costly, giving as of right entitlement to developments that include workforce housing. The third issue that we found in talking to developers about the challenges of building affordable housing, whether once again whole or in part with other market rate housing, is the regulatory environment. And the regulatory environment is, what are the codes that we have in the county across the board, across all disciplines, the building and zoning codes, the stormwater codes, the health codes, the transportation codes, the fire protection codes, the township codes, the public works codes. One of the things that we have found is that in most municipalities, you have one permitting process. In unincorporated areas, you have multiple disciplines of the county that are requiring multiple permits. You have multiple outside organizations that are part of the building permit process. So once you get past the entitlement process, now you're in the building permit process, and there are multiple disciplines that you have to work with. Fire districts, township road districts, school and park districts. And those processes are individual processes as opposed to just getting one building permit where all of those disciplines come into one. One of the things that we can do to mitigate that challenge, which adds cost and time to actually building a project, is to have a unified development code. Where if a development included whole and part a component of workforce or affordable housing, the development could enjoy a unified development code where you would just be developing under one code for all disciplines and one permit. And within each of those codes, there are certain things that you can do to relax the codes that wouldn't create a adverse situation and wouldn't compromise public safety and welfare. But we would as part of the entire working with the entire county disciplines across the board, from health to stormwater, public works, and building, we would find ways that we might be able to create codes that were more suitable for housing that had affordable housing component in it. One of the things that we could also do is expedite the time period that a development that had workforce or affordable housing component in it. We could expedite that. They would move to the front of the pack. That would be able to move the permitting process along much more quickly. That's not to say that the permitting process is delayed at all, but there are situations where we are able to move development quicker through the process if it was a much larger development. For instance, when we have a large subdivision, it's actually easier for the building department to have, for instance, one person handling that particular subdivision's building permits, because you've got one person handling one group. They get familiar with everything that particular subdivision needs, and it's a lot easier to expedite that. Also, when a developer comes in with multiple permits for a subdivision, they're usually coming in with 4 or 5 or 6 at a time, as opposed to just one permit. So it's easier to get that developer or that permitting process through if we just have one permit technician handling that. But it would be across the board where we'd have one unified development code that the developer could take advantage of, that would allow us to reduce the times it would take to process permits. And we would be coordinating across all disciplines, not only internally, but externally, that we have to deal with, once again, like the fire protection districts, the school and park districts, and also the township road districts for access to the properties. The other things that we've talked about and that with developers is the ability to have prefabricated and modular, what are called cross-mod housing units that are built in a factory, but we would work with our various disciplines and make sure that those disciplines had the ability to review what was going into those buildings while they were being built in a prefabricated shop somewhere. Most of the development that we have is built out in on a construction site, stick built. But one of the ways that you can reduce the cost of development is having these houses prefabricated, can still meet all of the building and zoning codes and life safety codes, but to create an atmosphere, a regulatory environment where you could review those in the warehouse and then bring them out to the site and just put them up pretty quickly, but create codes that would allow that to happen pretty efficiently. One of the things that we've talked about that is always going to be a constraint. We talked about this earlier in terms of the availability of land and why land is distressed in the unincorporated areas is the availability of public infrastructure, the ability to get sewer and water to the property. Most of our unincorporated areas that we're talking about that are somewhat distressed don't have ready availability of sewer and water, so they have to be built on septic and well. And developing on septic and well is sometimes not desirable and sometimes problematic. We've worked with the health department and they found ways that you can actually come up with different types of septic systems to accommodate multiple units, whether they be single family units or attached multifamily units. They're not readily available to developers because developers don't want to spend the time and money and put the cost into it, but there are opportunities for developers to build on septic and well and do multiple developments on septic and well. It's just a matter of having that information available and working with our county health department to show developers that it can be done and can be reasonably done. As I said before, we've got properties out there in the unincorporated that just don't have the ability to get public sewer to them. It's not cost effective and cost prohibitive to bring the sewer and water in, but we could still do certain types of developments, infill developments on septic and well, and use different types of new septic systems to be able to accommodate that. And one of the last issues that we found talking to developers that really increases the cost of development in the county is fees associated with all these processes. The fees associated with the entitlement process, which we talked a little about, and the fees associated with a building permit process. One of the things that we can do to mitigate that is obviously not have these processes in place, have them as of right, so that they don't have to spend time and money to bring in experts to make an argument as to why a development should be allowed. The other thing that we can do is reduce the cost of certain types of fees where relative to the affordable housing component. In most instances when we're talking about lowering the cost of development, it would also be to increase the availability and the density of development in certain areas. And by increasing the density of development, we'll get more units, we'll get more money in for that. But that would allow us to subsidize the workforce or affordable housing component and not require, for instance, building permit fees for the affordable housing components of a subdivision or a development. We also have a program in place right now where we give a 10% reduction for government development, and we also give a 10% reduction for LEED certified buildings. It's an attempt to give an incentive to people who develop LEED certified properties. So we give a building permit reduction of 10% for those types of developments. We could institute some sort of reduction in fees if people are willing to do affordable housing in a subdivision. The other thing that is related to fees that doesn't involve fees per se, but we see in municipalities a lot is that the county doesn't have the ability to subsidize development. We don't have the ability to have tax abatements. We don't have the ability to create what are called tax increment financing districts, TIFs. We sit on about 50 TIFs throughout the county in the 38 communities that are in the county. And what the municipalities do with that TIF money is, what a TIF is it takes an area that is determined to be blighted or distressed, similar to what we talked about in the first phase of our discussion here, and recognizes that the only way that area can be redeveloped is with the assistance of government funds. And they do it through tax increment financing. What they do with that is that if it's passed by their local municipality with TIF, they freeze the incremental tax increase on a certain area over a 23-year time period, and they take the additional tax that comes from a particular area and then give it back to the government, and the government uses that money to buy property. They use that money to put in infrastructure like public sewer, water, roadways, and to basically bring a public benefit to a development or an area that the private sector then can take advantage of. The private sector doesn't, in some cases, have cost of land. In some cases, they have public infrastructure that they can't afford, that the government puts in. And so all the private sector is doing is building the building at that point. And that's a way for local municipalities to sort of incentivize developers to come in and clean up an area. We don't have that capability here. So the one thing that we do have available to us is the ability to have as of right development, as of right entitlement, and relax our regulatory environment to a point where it doesn't compromise safety or welfare, but does allow for the cost developers to develop more reasonably and to bring some of the costs down across all of these disciplines that we're talking about, and then also reducing the fees. Now, one of the things that we had in here before is that we could reduce some of the fees that are associated with, development, like transportation impact fees, but we heard that those are going to go away. So that's a good thing for developers is not to have to pay those transportation impact fees. But that would have been, for instance, one of the things that we could have waived relative to affordable housing components in a housing development. But there are other things like that across the board that we could take a look at that would, once again, holistically reduce some of the cost of developing in the county. One of the things that we found from the National Home Builders Association is that from 1999 to 2017, it's going to be a little bit different now, but the metrics that we have is the cost of building a house has gone up 110%. And the cost of the sales price of a house has gone up about 125%. Over the course of that time period. Now it's probably a little bit higher now in the last couple of years, but the metrics that we have over that 20-year time period is it's over 110%. And once again, the issue that we found in DuPage County from developers is that there's just not a lot of land available in the county. What land is available is pricey, and it already has going concerns on it. So there's a lot of cost associated with having to rehabilitate that land, and particularly for the unincorporated area, the land that's available, that could be available, is really distressed. And we find that developers are just bypassing that land, which leads to, just complete disinvestment in the area. We find that land continues to deteriorate. And now we're spending county dollars, tax dollars, to at least get the code violations off of that property, let alone in some instances just getting rid of the properties altogether because they're in such bad shape. But even when we do that, we're still not finding any investment coming back into those communities because of the lack of, as I said before, infrastructure and the problems with the property relative to stormwater issues and special management issues. So as Mary talked about the first time around, she talked about some of the public funding issues that are associated with keeping cost of properties down and the limitations on public funding. What we found here is that there are limitations and challenges to developers to develop housing, and let alone affordable housing in the county, because of these four concepts. And if there's ways that we can mitigate them, which we think we can, then we can bring down the cost of housing dramatically to be able to build it in the future. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Any questions, Paul? Member Gust.
Thank you, Paul. That's a lot of information all in one presentation. And thank you very much for making it so succinct and providing us with that information. While I was on the city council, it took 4 years to get a lot of this information gathered to find out exactly how we could make an effort towards affordable housing. The physical impediments were very, very difficult, as they are for the county. Unless you have a bunch of acres that's just sitting there and nobody's built on it, you've now got the demolition cost of something versus just a vacant lot that you can redevelop. Also, with the lean and mean, is that it? The lean and clean. Lean and mean.
We're not mean here in DuPage.
Clean, yeah,
we're not Naperville.
with that program, it's a wonderful program. Never heard of it before. And I know we worked on a couple of properties that needed that attention. However, if it goes to foreclosure, I would anticipate that then the person who bought it would be more on the market level of buying it as an investment to kind of flip it for a higher price. So I'm wondering how we could legally prohibit that and make it, and this isn't, you don't need to have an answer now, but literally prohibit that and have those potential assets go into some kind of land bank to be able to retrofit them. And I mean, some of them are so dilapidated that you might have to tear them down. But what are the legal steps that can be taken, if there are any, with respect to the foreclosure process and that? The other is the incentive program, which is a very wonderful concept. And it also allows developers to look at, if you're going to do the IDA affordable housing numbers, you can get these incentives. So the incentive might be you get more height, or you get your setbacks are not as set back. You get more density, more FAR. If you're going to do the HUD affordable calculation, you might get less than that, right? And if you do the market affordable, because there is a component of that, and I'll get to that in a minute, then you get less of those benefits of height density modifications. So those are all things that we can kind of talk about. The biggest one that I heard from developers way back was the amount of time that it takes. If there's some way to fast track, if somebody can prove to the county that they want to do affordable housing, and there would be a calculation on that, and they fall within that calculation. We did have some subdivisions that provided a percentage of affordable housing and the rest was market housing, but yet they were able to get those incentives because they fell within that range. So I love the fact of the overlay district, because I think that will really kind of give us a snapshot of maybe what's distressed out there, what we might have an opportunity in doing. Also, I would think we would want to hear the voice of our residents as to, hey, this is what we're thinking. This is our overlay of the areas that we see some opportunity, and then making sure that we have our residents engaged, because developers and residents don't always get along. And so that would probably negate, or at least I would say limit a little limit on controversy. So those were just my thoughts on it. The other thing I'd love to see is, if next meeting, we had a speaker here today who was right on point about the 30%. If we could get HUD's AMI and how they calculated their AMI, which I believe is regionally, and then also if they included like the real estate taxes in it. Okay, so that would be helpful to actually get those actual numbers. The TIFs can be helpful, but I will tell you, the TIFs, a lot of times people oppose because it doesn't pay into the school district. A lot of times the money doesn't go to the park district. So depending upon the type of TIFs, we did a TIF in downtown Naperville on the Water Street development, which is all commercial. It was a blighted area. We did a TIF, multi-million dollars, but it is vibrant. It is phenomenal. It brings people to the city. There was also another TIF at Pacifica on 59 and Aurora Road. That one was going to affect the school districts, but some deal was made where they were able to go forward with that TIF. I'm not a big advocate of TIFs, but sometimes they do work depending upon, if the school district taxes are going to be affected or things like that. So.
Yeah, I can, a couple of things. Relative to the clean and lean program, we call it the neighborhood revitalization program because it's a little softer, but it's clean and lean because there's Illinois state statute that speaks to the ability for the county to go into court, ask the judge to give us the ability to clean a piece of property because we've determined that it's blighted and we've shown it's blighted or unsafe. And then we can clean the property, remove the houses, remove the structures, and then lien the property for our costs, and then potentially foreclose on that lien. And in lieu of getting compensated with money, we could ask the court to allow us to have the property. And there have been instances where we've been able to get property. And in the past, we've auctioned that property off to get our money back. We would not do that here. We hold on to it. There's also some state legislation going on right now that would give the counties the ability to participate, not counties, government agencies, including the county, the ability to participate a lot more competitively with the foreclosure market, with the tax buyers out there. It moves the process along a little bit more quickly and gives the county the ability to participate and potentially get those properties in foreclosure processes. So we're working with the state's attorney's office on just exactly what that legislation means for the county. But it's intended to allow the county to be able to get these properties sooner than later, because a lot of times what's happening is tax buyers are picking these properties up, or they're being picked up in the foreclosure market, and they're just being flipped, or they're just being left. And then instead of dealing with the previous owner on code enforcement issues, we're dealing with the tax buyer on code enforcement issues. But there might be some opportunities for us to get these properties more quickly than we normally would in the past. In addition,
would you manage those properties then? If we absorb those properties, number one, would you manage them? And number two, if you're going to, would you sell them, or, rent them, sell them? Again, it's going to be
Patty, we're getting way into the weeds here.
I'm just talking about affordability
I know,
portion of it and how that might be affected on your end.
One of the things that we will be bringing to you is the next component of the whole affordable housing and housing solutions program, which includes the ability of county governments or governments to be able to engage in land or have land banks and housing trust. And we'll be bringing some folks before you about how the county might be able to have a housing trust and manage that, or how we might be able to partner with other organizations that currently do that. But we'll be bringing some people to talk about that specific item in our next two segments.
Great. We are going to be addressing those questions. Member Garcia, Member Ozag, and Member you.
Thank you. Kind of following up with what Paul just said, the land bank is something that I'm excited to see come forward. I know that a lot of the areas in the village experience that I had, they were distressed areas, but if we could put them all together, we could have actually done something with them. Some of the issues too were the floodplain issues. And now I don't like seeing things built on floodplains per se, but if they were a larger property, there might be able to be a detention area or something made that would help that. So it would rise the property or the house out of the floodplain, and so that some things could be done more with that. The one thing, couple questions I had, I'm very excited about the wells. Coming from a municipality where, they didn't allow any kind of wells. This is, I'm seeing 14 service connections per water well. That is something, if we can do that, that would be maybe fantastic, because we can really allow for some building without having the infrastructure, because that is so expensive. And quick question for you, what is a cross mod housing?
Cross mod housing is a fancy term for modular housing. It's a way to take the stigmatism off the term modular housing, which a lot of people think is a trailer or something like that. It's not. It's a house that is built in a factory, and it's built with all the walls and all of the mechanics inside the walls.
Is it like the old Sears homes that used to come out?
You could say that, but obviously
myself here, I know.
Yeah, but here's a picture of what these homes look like. They're just prefabbed in a factory. And one of the dilemmas that we have, I think there's a couple of them out in Indiana. We've been out to them many years ago and took a look at how they build these, but they basically build them all in the factory, and they come out to the site. In some instances, they come out just like this, or they come out and they piece them together. But one of the dilemmas that we have from a building code standpoint is making sure that all of the plumbing and electrical and HVAC components are in there and are meeting the threshold codes that we have. One of the things that we could do is have our inspectors review how these things are made out in the factory and have them certified and things like that. But that's essentially what it is. It's just a modular house that's manufactured in a factory and then brought out to the site and put together in one or two just put
Yeah.
together on site put on a
And
foundation.
if they were able to be on the wells and the septic, then that's something that could be easily
Yeah, and
adapted. to
that in
one.
itself reduces the cost. Just go, and before I go any further, going back to the IHDA grant, we have started the application process with that. One of the things that we did back in, I think, 2016 is when we started the Clean and Lean program. One of the reasons that we really couldn't do anything is we didn't have any money, and the county gave us $50,000, and then we parlayed that into some money with IHD at the time, and I think we ended up with about $365,000 in money that was available for us to actually go in and clean properties up. We're going to do the same thing this time. The county gave us $250,000 in our Clean and Lean budget. We're going to go ahead and use that as match for potentially $750,000 with this IHDA grant, which would give us a great deal of money to go in and start cleaning properties up. And it's not with the intent of cleaning these properties up and then foreclosing on them. It's in the intent of cleaning them up. And if it just so happens that we would go through the lien process and foreclose on the lien, get the properties, we would hold the properties as opposed to auctioning them off. So we're going to be working with the IHD very closely on that.
And that would be more of the land bank kind of an issue. where
Yeah,
you start
and
banking
start to
together.
inventory these lands. The other thing that's important, you kind of mentioned a little bit, is that some of our remnant properties are properties that we purchased because there were special management issues on some of the property or a portion of the property. So we do have some properties that are owned by the county that where the properties are inundated with special management areas, but there are some areas on those properties that an individual property owner couldn't develop, but collectively the county might be able to develop on some of those properties that are combined and stay out of the special management areas and still have enough room to develop. There are also remnant properties of projects that transportation, public works, and stormwater have built where we've completed the project, but we have some remnant land left over. Those could be available for this inventory of land.
Member Ozak. Okay, member you.
Thank you, Chair. So I really appreciated the fact that in this presentation, you had these challenges laid out, then you had what we can do to overcome those challenges. And so I just wanted to ask kind of a more like legal question in the sense that all of these things sound really great and I want to do all of them. Yes to everything. But are we allowed to do it as a county? Is there anything that we wouldn't be able to do considering we're non-home rule? And would it require a lot of legislation down in Springfield? Did you already anticipate this question and kind of went through that in the presentation? I just wanted to know.
Yep, no. You're correct. That I don't want to get too far into the weeds on legal questions, but some of these things like land banks and land trusts would potentially require legislation. We've talked with the state's attorney's office about that. And one of the options that we want to put out there for you, and we'll bring other speakers in to talk about this, is the ability to either do it ourselves, which could require some legislation, or partner with other jurisdictions or other entities, nonprofits in the county that already have the capability of doing that. So that's one of the things that we are going to present to you, and then there will be an option for you to do. And keep in mind that if we wanted to do it ourselves, that it would likely take some legislation.
Member Rolich.
Thank you, chairs. Couple comments today. Member Garcia brought up modular houses, and I have seen some fabulous modular houses made of shipping containers. So nice way to get rid of some of those that are, it's cost too much money to send them back to China. So they just make more and they send them all here, and then we got to figure out what to do with them. So take a look at that. The other thing you mentioned was relaxing codes, and this is more for maybe helping older residents help manage their property taxes, but sometimes those people are in a home where they raise their children. They don't have the means to move to something smaller. So they have a couple of bedrooms, and I know that like short-term rentals like Airbnb or VRBO or things like that are not allowed in the county, but I'm wondering if we might relax those codes on room rentals in a home where there's already a resident there. I think that that's a good source of revenue for those people to help them maybe stay in their home and to be able to afford their property taxes. So we don't ultimately get those houses anyway. So I'm wondering if there's room for that.
There is, and that already exists. It is not pronounced in the zoning ordinance, but when you work through the machinations of the various codes, what you're talking about is already allowed. But I think what you're looking at is to actually make sure that we have a code that actually spells that out. For instance, in the zoning code, when you look at zoning codes, it says in these zoning districts, you can do single family homes, R3, 4, R1, 2, 3, and 4. But there are also the ability to have some nuances that you're allowed to do. For instance, not more than 5 people who are unrelated by blood or marriage can live together. Well, that's buried in the code. We have a provision in our code that talks about accessory dwelling units for people who are over the age of 62. And we spell that out. I think what you're getting at is that rather than have someone dig through that, actually, have a place in the code where we actually spell it out, call it something, give it a name, and then make sure that people are aware of that opportunity to do it. That's a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but along those same lines, I think it does go to the regulatory environment, clean up our codes a little bit to make it crystal clear what people are entitled to do by right, where they kind of have to thumb through the code to figure that out, or give me a call and we have to explain it to them. But put it in there, make it a specific code, and then perhaps market it as that's an availability that's allowed. Absolutely. The other thing that's important to note too, and I didn't want to get too far in the weeds in it, but when we're talking about the regulatory codes, the county does about 100 to 110 historically zoning cases a year. We're by far the largest of any jurisdiction in the county. The closest, I think, is Wheaton, that does about 35 zoning cases a year. There's any number of reasons for that. But having said that, the point is that over the last 5 years, we've calculated that 90% of those zoning cases are approved by the county board. And those are zoning cases that are asking for lot splits to create smaller lot sizes for lot splits, 1 or 2 lots, variations in the ability to increase the height, increase the square footage, to reduce the setbacks. And for the most part, the developers or property owner will go through that entitlement process. There's time and money associated with that. But what we found ultimately is that the county board is approving those because the petitioner or the staff has been able to show the county board that in this particular case, it's reasonable. What we're talking about in terms of as of right entitlement is take those same kind of concepts and establish in some of these distressed areas where those types of things should be allowed already. And instead of and creating this unified development code that allows that as of right, so that the property owner or developer doesn't have to go through the entitlement process. We've sort of already done the due diligence on these properties and suggested that if you are going to allow for zoning relief in terms of your bulk regulations, these would be a good location to do it. And if someone comes in and wants to do housing and affordable housing, they should be entitled to do it as of right and not have to go through the process. And just as, like I say, I know I'm repeating myself, but when we have these public hearings and ultimately you hear people comment a development committee and county board about a project, they are generally making a reasonable argument as to why they should be granted the zoning relief, because their property has floodplain or wetland on it, and they need to move their building up a little closer to the property line because of the presence of that. We can already identify those properties and once again suggest that there should be an overlay to allow certain bulk regulation relaxing because we're already aware of those problematic areas and avoid the cost and the time that it takes to go through the entitlement and zoning process.
Member Dessert.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Paul, for your presentation today. It was very important. A lot of stuff packed into that 5-pound bag. So earlier today during county board, I brought up the Illinois Housing Development Authority's announcement of the $15 million available grant dollars for the things we're talking about, for acquisition, maintenance, rehabilitation, and demolition of abandoned residential properties and communities. And you brought up that same grant during your presentation. Does that mean that it's been dispersed and DuPage County got some of the money, and how much did DuPage County get? But I see you shake your head no.
So in the past, but this is the I think
It's a new program.
Yeah.
We just heard about last month, and it's basically, I say we at IDA, it's basically making funds available for people to rehab make repairs on their homes that they weren't able to do during the pandemic because.
So it's for people,
they didn't have
individuals,
money.
not governmental entities like us?
Well, it's a combination of the two. That was a question that I asked last month.
Yeah.
But essentially, people are going to make those applications, but I think they're going to make them through municipalities and government entities.
And the due date for that app, we've taken advantage of this before. We've used this program before. They've renamed it. But we've used it from IDA before and it was very successful to us. The application date is, I think, June 7th. And we have already started the application. We are going to be applying for those funds. You can apply up to $750,000 with a match, and that's what we're going to be going for. That's not suggesting that we're going to get it. But we did get a good deal of money the last time around, I think a couple of years ago before the pandemic, that was very instrumental in our clean and lean program. We were able to use that money to pay for the cost of doing demolition and cleaning up property. We hope to do the same thing again here with these funds.
And this new money is different from what we already have. It would be in addition, and Cheryl's got the information as well. I gave it to her this morning. Any other questions? Okay, one of the things that I've learned, among many of the things that I've learned at IDA over the last 10 years, is much of the land that affordable housing is built on is donated by private individuals, particularly in the city, in Chicago. You've got trusts that have been owned by families for years that they just donate the land, which again, as Paul said, takes out a third of the cost of what some of this might be. So if anybody knows anybody that's got land that they want to give us, that would certainly help us along the way as well. Yeah, you guys. But it's a process. There's, a lot of things going through this, and we've got to remember we don't do this in a vacuum. We're doing this with the municipalities and all of our other partners as well. So, but I think we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of months and a lot of information, and there's going to be more to come. So we certainly appreciate all of the questions and your attendance. Liz, that you want to jump in?
I just want to say, as we gather this information, I think the point of this is then at the end of our gathering, we'll put together a plan, of what type of developments do we want to see. So, we're gathering all the information, and then once we have it, we can decide on what type of developments we want to pursue. So, it'll be a while, but it's very important that we get all this information before we decide on how we want to go forward.
And one of the things, a number of the things we talked about when we kind of did the planning for this meeting too, this is going to be multifaceted. It's not going to be just one building that we're going to put all these people in. It's going to might be 15 single family homes that we can use, a 12-story apartment building, Sheila's idea. They'd have to be affordable rentals, but we'd have to convince those people to do it affordably. But that anything we can do to make affordable housing in whatever way we can is what we're looking at doing, with the county being a partner and trying to make it a little bit easier for developers. So that's the process. Nothing else? Anything else from anyone? Yes, Don.
Thank you. I just wanted to bounce off what Chair Chaplin said, that once we get all this information, we'll make a plan. So that leaves me to ask you, Paul, are you and your staff already kind of looking around and identifying potential properties, even derelict properties, that we might consider to use for this project? Are you already starting to identify some acquisitions or land properties?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, we're developing a map that will ultimately be available to the county board members. It's something that we have to be concerned about sharing publicly because we don't want to artificially increase the value of these properties. But we are developing a map through our code enforcement process and our clean and lean process of distressed areas where we have a lot of code enforcement activity, where we have the lack of sewer and water, where we have floodplain and wetland, and we'll be able to superimpose that all on a map and identify where these areas are.
And are they strictly in unincorporated areas, or are we working with municipalities?
All unincorporated. Yeah, just unincorporated right now. That's our program right now.
Paul and his staff have definitely identified that, but we're dealing with it slowly again to avoid a rush of people going to those properties. Okay, I hear nothing. I see nothing further in terms of questions. Any old business? Any new business? Entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Any opposed? We adjourn. Thank you all.